The role of global dispute agencies. The United Nations, International Court of Justice, and the World Trade Organization are all global dispute agencies that help settle arguments or provide assist to countries on the issues of poverty, war, crime, and food. These agencies usually help countries that are in dire need. For example, countries like South Sudan, Liberia, and Mozambique are some of the poorest nations in the world. Therefore, they get a lot of help from these agencies. The United Nations is an international organization founded in 1945. It's made up of 193 countries and states. Some big names would include China, Russia, and the United Kingdom. All these countries follow the charter that was made by the organization. The charter has dozens of rules, but there are three main ones. The first is the consent of both parties. This rule states that the UN cannot deploy assistance without the consent of the main parties involved. This acceptance of peacemaking makes it possible for the UN to move freely and carry out tasks. The second rule is impartiality. Imagine two countries are playing soccer with each other. The United Nations play the role of the referee, and just like a good referee, it cannot pick favorites. Because in a proper soccer match, if the referee starts being biased towards one team and calling out unfair tackles, there's a risk of the other country breaking the peace and turning the issue into something much more than a simple soccer match. The last rule states the United Nations cannot use violent force except in self-defense and defense of the mandate. Overall, the United Nations is an organization that tries to find solutions for all the countries involved. The International Court of Justice, ICJ, is the United Nations' main judicial body. The United Nations Charter established it in June 1945 and it began operating in April 1946. The court's headquarters are in The Hague's Peace Palace in Netherlands. It is one of the only United Nations' six main organs that is not based in New York, the United States of America. The court's role is to resolve legal disputes brought to it by states in line with international law, as well as to provide advisory opinions on legal problems addressed to it by the nations and institutions. Lastly, the World Trade Organization. The WTO was founded in 1995 and it deals with the global rules of trade between nations. Its main function is to ensure that global trade flows smoothly, predictably, and freely as possible. It is run by its member governments. All major decisions are by the membership, either by ministers or by their ambassadors or delegates. The meetings are held in Geneva and decisions are made by consensus. All these organizations have supported Somalia in its struggle with poverty and other issues. Years of civil war and conflict led Somalia to be one of the poorest nations in the world. After the collapse of the Somali Democratic Republic in 1991, the country has been divided. Wars were waged, which killed thousands of citizens and destroyed the lives of others. Today, the poverty rate in Somalia is 73%, though some global dispute agencies are now trying to lower that percentage. The United Nations has been trying to help Somalia since the 60s. Since then, the organization has supported Somalia's government to become more structured. It has also led the development of a recovery and resilience framework, which basically means that the resources are being spent on humanitarian needs will deliver long-term solutions. The UN has also supported the strengthening of the health system, better responses to epidemics, child health, new hospitals. The UN has also provided safe drinking water to most parts of Somalia. The main goal of the United Nations in Somalia is to eradicate extreme poverty by 2030. Somalia doesn't contribute much to global trade. It's almost impossible if you're a poor country because most trade happens when trucks cross country borders and deliver goods. When a country such as Somalia doesn't have the infrastructure or roads to facilitate, then all trade is halted to a stop. The World Trade Organization has taken a step to eradicate these problems by allowing Somalia to begin the process of becoming a part of the organization. Once Somalia joins the WTO, it will have access to 98% of the world market. This means that local Somali businesses can finally create brands that will be able to reach places like Europe and America. Trade will be cheap, efficient, and easy. More economic growth will take place due to less restricted trade. This global trade would eventually allow Somalia to become less dependent on their agricultural economy, which will decline eventually due to climate change. Some other benefits would be reduced cost of living for Somalis, more choice and quality of goods, and increased income for individuals. Not related to poverty, but the ICJ has helped Somalia in many issues. The biggest is probably the Kenya maritime dispute. Somalia opened the case against Kenya in 2014 over contested parts of the Indian Ocean believed to have rich natural oil and gas reserves. The claim involves 100,000 square kilometers of seafloor, which both countries lay claim to. Somalia took this dispute all the way to the ICJ, and they won the dispute, and the court drew a new boundary that kept some of the disputed area under Kenya jurisdiction, but still awarded a sizable chunk to Somalia. And that's my presentation. Thank you for listening.